Welcome back to Insight. Let's return to radicalisation and the efforts being made to understand what drives some young Muslims to leave their homes and travel to Iraq or Syria. It's an issue that's being explored in a new film by a Canadian filmmaker. It's called Tug of War. Here's a short clip.
Yo, Khalil.
Anas?
Yeah, bro, get in. But look at you. You're all changed now. You're a sheikh. Oh, you haven't shaved in 4 years?
Yeah, man.
Well, I'm telling you, man, you changed, that's good. But Allah's gonna start testing you right now.
Bro, being locked away in a cell for 4 years, that was enough of a test, bro. After that, I think I'm ready for anything.
We just can't allow people to stay the night in the masjid.
Yeah, but
extremely sorry
only
about that.
one night. I'll be gone by Fajr time. You won't even know I was here.
If you really don't have enough place to stay, I can suggest to you just one thing. Why don't you try some city shelters?
Bro, can I crash here, man? I got nowhere else to go.
See anything you like?
Yeah, is this an actual cookbook or what?
Depends on what you're cooking, right?
Bomb making, sabotage, TNT. Yo, this is some serious stuff, man. What did they say?
Yeah, we're good.
Someone's gonna pick us up when we land
Yes.
and take us across the border.
Yes.
You sure?
Positive.
All right, good. Nervous?
Well, I'm joined in the studio today by the spoken word poet, who's one of the actors in the movie, Boonaa Mohammed, who you just saw in that clip. And alongside him is Navaid Aziz, who was an advisor to the movie. He also serves as a family and youth counsellor in Calgary. Boonaa, why did you want to make this particular story?
I think for a long time, many Muslims, including myself, have been very confused as to why someone would want to throw their lives away, why someone would actually want to join a group like ISIS. And I really, when I delved into this issue and I spoke with people like Navaid Aziz and other scholars in the community, and they would advise me and tell me about, the different stories of the different youth that they would counsel before they left, it really inspired me to want to tell that story and to explain to our community how people go down this road, because it doesn't occur in a vacuum. Sometimes there are certain issues, societal issues, family issues that lead someone to feel extremely vulnerable, that some recruiter or someone who has this mentality can sweep them off their feet. So it was twofold. One was to really understand how this occurs, and the second was to educate and really explain to people the troubles and the problems that come along with this particular way of thinking.
Navaid, how does it occur? How do you stop it?
How do you stop it? That's like the million-dollar question that everyone's asking these days. So a lot of my research is focused on not de-radicalizing someone, but how on a communal level we can protect kids. So what we call preventative, vulnerability. And what we do over here is a 4-step program where we educate them, give them critical thinking skills, give them confidence, and most importantly, give them volunteer initiatives where they feel a part of something greater than themselves. So just to give you a brief example, we take them to the Calgary Drop-In Center, which is the largest homeless shelter, where they interact with the disenfranchised and serve food. And this gives them a sense of appreciation that, hey, I really am blessed, and my problems really aren't that bad compared to the greater society. And we also take them to the Bethany Care Center, which is a senior citizens home. And over here, they just play games and interact. And this has 2 benefits to them. One is that the senior citizens have like this grandfather, grandmother type figure role where they show this unconditional love to them. And then number 2, they get to benefit from their experience and wisdom, particularly from people that are like 5 or 6 times older than they are. So they have an immense amount of experience and wisdom to share with them.
But does that implication suggest that normal young people growing up do not have that exposure to the older generation or to people of what we might call a sound mind or a logical thinking, that some way they've got lost?
I think what we've learned, and from my own experiences being a young Muslim growing up in the West, is that you find that some people have this sense of alienation. They don't quite feel a part of the fabric of society.
Where does that come from, though, do you think?
I mean, you could say it's a lot of things. It's in part due to racism, in part due to their own experiences with discrimination. I mean, I grew up post 9/11 North America, so immediately my identity was carved out for me. I was one of them. I was the other, right? And so when you consistently grow up in this environment where you're told, for example, you're not British enough, or you're not Canadian enough, or you're not American enough, you really start to, you could potentially unfortunately believe that rhetoric that groups, overseas or whoever are calling to. And it's the same reason why people join gangs. It's the same reason why people join other fringe movements, right? It's that vulnerability and that alienation in society that pushes them to the brink of what we consider to be normal.
And yet you had a film which examines the story of two very different outcomes for two young people. One criticism levelled at it is it's sort of a bit of government propaganda. You're just trying to make sure this is going on, it's all very one-sided. How do you respond to that particular critique?
As we mentioned previously, that we don't screen this movie except with a discussion that takes place after the movie. And that discussion is imperative. And in this discussion, we talk about keeping youth safe is not just from radicalization, but it's from all vulnerabilities that are out there. Gang violence, drugs, promiscuity, whatever it may be. So our focus is just on protecting youth. And that's why the narrative has nothing to do with government propaganda per se. In fact, the model that we present is a pre-criminal and a post-criminal phase. So in the pre-criminal phase, it is a community that's taking the lead and law enforcement takes the back seat. In the post-criminal phase, law enforcement takes the front seat and the community takes the back seat, where there's open exchange of information, there's transparency, and everyone is on the same page. And that's what we need to understand, is that this issue of radicalization is not exclusive to the Muslim community. It is a societal-wide problem, and everyone has to take ownership of that, and not just the Muslim community.
I mean, you've used dramatic license, haven't you, in terms of the context you put these two characters in.
Right.
The police informant, that's an interesting job.
Right.
Because many young men, particularly, wouldn't ever do that job, would they?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. The film in and of itself is based not just on one story, but on many true stories.
Sure.
And we have many documented cases of people being entrapped. And this is where I would also refute the claim that this somehow fits into kind of government propaganda, because we don't fit the government narrative. We show that there are people who, for example, are being pushed towards a certain direction, right? The fact that we would show and be critical of law enforcement and be critical of government agencies and people who are trying to really counter this issue, but in many ways are actually pushing youth closer to those particular groups.
Do you think governments are getting it wrong?
I think a lot are. I think a lot are. And I think that's partly due, in fact, to the fact that we as Muslims have not been at the table. And there's a beautiful saying that says that if you're not, I'm going to steal his saying, if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu, right? And if we are not there to really influence those discussions, if we're not there to help really policymakers and people in charge really understand and get this right, then of course they're going to be left with no choice but to do wrong.
But I think in other experiences, and I mean just one from the United Kingdom here, where governments have tried to reach out to the Muslim community, to leaders and so on, to involve them in discussion meetings, to come up with policies and plans. But the reality is slightly different, that, fine words are spoken around a government committee room, but the reality at the mosque, at the supermarket, at places of work, is a bit different. That's a challenge for everyone, isn't it?
So I can speak on behalf of Calgary and what's worked well in Calgary. And what we've noticed over there is that rather than using an infrastructure that is based upon informants and intelligence gathering from that perspective, what they focus on is their own appreciative rating. And what we mean by that is how well does the Calgary police do their job. So they have a rating of like 95% or higher, which is one of the highest in the world. And what they've done over here, they've built such a strong rapport with the community, is that whenever there is a threat, they'll naturally volunteer that information because they have that rapport already. Whereas in other communities, because that rapport isn't there and the approval ratings aren't as high, they have to rely on getting informants. And now in terms of what's actually going on in the Muslim community, in these two communities, if you look at Calgary and other communities, with that natural rapport with the police and law enforcement, people are very supportive and they work together. Whereas when they're at opposing ends and they haven't interacted in a non-conflict or non-conflicting environment, no one wants to deal with law enforcement, no one wants to deal with government. And that's what ends up happening. So I think if law enforcement and government spent more time building rapport with communities, they would naturally get the information that is required rather than the need to hire informants and then having to verify that information.
I mean, that's an argument probably from any part of society, isn't it, really? Right. I mean, for poor areas, for black ghettos in many nations and things like that. That's probably a formula for success.
For sure. And that's what we want to try to push, is that this infrastructure of gathering informants does not work.
Okay. The other, and in a sense, it's a sort of backhanded compliment, I suppose, to your film that it's even Stevens, is because just as there are those people who say this is kind of some kind of government propaganda, nobody's going to listen to it, there are also critics who say, actually, you've highlighted the cause of becoming radicalized, of going to take the fight and go over to whatever it might be, Syria or Iraq. And some people actually might be motivated to do that, having seen the film. Do you think that's a possibility?
No, I don't think that's a possibility at all, because we clearly highlight in the film the negative realities of people who go there, and what's left behind are grieving families, people who are regretful once they get there. And we clearly show that, I mean, this is really a direction nobody wants for themselves, especially once they get there. Because unfortunately, people are sold this very romanticized notion. And we've known this over time. Once they get there, they see the reality of it. And
why does that work, do you think? Why does that sort of appeal? You know, you're doing the right thing, or you're coming here and you'll be rewarded. Why does that language work so well?
Everybody wants to be a part of something greater than themselves. And in the society we live in, unfortunately, like I said, a lot of times these young people don't feel a part of that fabric. They don't feel like they're contributing members. They don't feel like they can climb that social ladder. And because of that, you know, they're vulnerable to that call overseas of come here and you'll be a king, you know, come here and you'll be a warrior and you'll be respected and loved because of it. It's unfortunate that people kind of, you know, feed into that rhetoric. And like I said, it's really the exact same way people get into gangs. People who have a very low self-esteem, or they have a very low image of themselves. Maybe they don't have that love and support at home. Somebody tells them, hey, join our group, join our community. You know, we're going to make you a member. We're going to make you a family. It's the same way of thinking.
Something that I would add to that, if you don't mind, is that something that often gets neglected in, you know, counter-radicalization strategies is the importance of looking at foreign policy. Like there's a large amount of frustration in these youth that do travel overseas, and no one ever wants to address the elephant in the room that, hey, perhaps our foreign policy is what's causing these issues. So that's one element of it. The second element of it is what we've learned from Brexit and, you know, Donald Trump getting into power, is that people no longer have faith in the establishment anymore. They no longer trust their governments that are in play. So when we want to look for positive change in the world, particularly in the realm of foreign policy, groups like ISIS are very appealing because their narrative is, we are making positive change. We're going to take down the establishment, you know, one step at a time.
But it's also rather, it's beguilingly simple. Isn't that the point, that we are right and everybody else is wrong?
Of course.
And surely anybody who knows, and I take your point that foreign policy is in a state of flux, to put it mildly, it's complicated, isn't it? I mean, just looking at Syria, the various layers and pressures, it's very difficult to determine who's right and who's wrong.
Right.
When many people don't like President Assad, he seems to have Russian support today. He doesn't have American support yet. He might do next week or in a month's time. It's complicated, this stuff, isn't it?
That's why commenting on what's going on currently is very difficult to comment on, because the reality on the ground is completely different. But in hindsight, let's look at Iraq instead. We went into Iraq, 2003, US-led coalition, under the guise of weapons of mass destruction. Nothing was found. And, you know, if you were to take conservative statistics, 200,000 people were killed, and all we got was an apology of a president saying, sorry, we didn't find those. And then there was collateral damage of 200,000 people being killed, depleted uranium being used, and, you know, the strife that people are going through is still there. In this country, if someone kills one person, you're going for a life sentence. But if you kill 200,000 people, you get away scot-free? Like, how does that work exactly? That's why I say in hindsight, we can look at Iraq. Syria is a lot more complicated. But I think once the Syria problem is over, we'll have 20/20 hindsight on that as well.
You've been taking the tour now, you've been showing the film and having these discussions. What sort of feedback have you had? What's the reaction?
Overwhelmingly positive. You know, people have been really excited to vent some of their frustrations. And you know, the film actually talks about a lot of different things. We talk about the role of our mosques and how we can better engage with society, and, you know, servicing people that might be underprivileged in many different ways, whether people who are coming from outside the community, new Muslims, women. So, you know, we open up a lot of interesting doors that I think as a community here specifically, we never really had opportunities to do so with. So it's been really interesting. I mean, the discussions for me have been worth more than anything, because just hearing people's insight and knowing that people want to leave the room excited, energized, and motivated to change their world is something that, you know, it means the world to me.
Boonaa Mohammed, Navaid Aziz, thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you very much for having us.
Now we end with our Insight Bite, a little something that we feel you should know. And today it's the word xenophobia. The online dictionary website dictionary.com has chosen the word xenophobia as its word of the year. The decision follows a spike in people searching for the term between June 22nd and June 24th, when searches for it increased by 938%. Spikes were also seen after a speech by President Obama, in which he called the rhetoric of the now President-elect Donald Trump a measure of xenophobia, or worse. And that's it from me. I'm Martin Stanford. That was Insight.